my question to you, Simo, is what do you hope to achieve with being a podcast host here in Nocturno Unwrap? What do you hope to do for our listeners in a sense?
Well, firstly, what the podcast presents for me is an opportunity. There's an opportunity for me to learn. There's an opportunity for me to participate in very fruitful discourse and hopefully not sound like an idiot. There's an opportunity to engage with people I may or may not agree with. And that appeals to me. The the whole learning aspect of what we do here. I know that we have it as hosts and probably as the guests who are going to come on that we want to teach. But I mean, I spent the last podcast we did with Kristan, we spent an hour just learning about the FSCA, which we knew nothing
Oh,
about.
really?
So I'm here to learn, hopefully have a chuckle here and there, and just kick it with my friend from very, very long time ago, as we
Yeah.
just established.
Yeah. No, I think that's a brilliant answer. I also think it's important maybe to introduce, and maybe not to perhaps delve into too much detail about, your legal insight into the conversations, because I do think that this is an important point. So, I mean, we've obviously had the discussion before, and you've never failed to point out to me ad nauseum that markets cannot exist unless within a legal framework. And I think that's true. I mean, I've thought a great deal about it. And it's actually been one of the reasons that I've shifted away from my more anarcho-capitalistic outlook on markets. There's a very intelligent guy, by the way, who I wish we can have on the podcast one of these days. His name is Mbiake Dlamini, who's been on the Big Daddy Liberty Show quite a number of times. He's perhaps the only eloquent anarcho-capitalist that I've ever come across. Like, he's absolutely brilliant. But that's perhaps a subject for another day. But, one of the reasons that I've shifted away from those positions is, among other things, as a result of some of the conversations that I've had with Simo, which have really brought to light the importance of having, a very well established and clearly defined legal outlook for markets to operate. And, obviously the guests or the listeners rather will know that I'm extremely interested in the operation of markets and just the application of, as Adam Smith called it, the invisible hand. But I think it's not a good enough conversation to have if it's had in isolation, and if we do not introduce the legal aspect of it, and which is partly why I think Simo is going to be such a welcomed introduction to the podcast.
We are a foundational feature of everything, Phila. The law is
Yeah.
everywhere. The law is everything.
Yeah.
Rules
Yeah.
govern life. So, I mean, economics, why not? We govern that too.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think that's a wonderful point. And I think perhaps not to get into too much detail about it. I mean, I think, as I said, you're one of the reasons that I started thinking really, really seriously about, how I wish or how I think economies should be structured. It's obviously not a top-down approach. It's not something that I can off the top of my head come up with. But I do think that, you do an extremely good job in helping me ground some of the views that I espouse. That's perhaps something that we can tease out during the season-long podcast series that you and I will be hosting. Kristan, I'm not sure if you have any questions for Simo.
No, definitely. So being a politics student, we did touch upon in a module that I did this semester actually, how certain states that stick, well, I won't say stick, that keep their importing and exporting to themselves cannot free ride on the backs of economies or states that take the risk of importing and exporting and having relations with countries like that. But just the fact that you have a passion for the legal framework within market relations like this, it excites me to know that I will get to learn a bit more about the legal aspect of it, because being a politics student, I only learn about the politics aspect of it.
We're in that field too. We're there
Ooh,
too. Law is there too.
be
We are
everywhere.
everywhere. I actually have a question for you guys.
Ah,
One thing that I found daunting about joining this podcast this year was that we're now moving to being not just audio but visual too. So I mean, people get to see us and put a face to the name and voices. Aren't you guys any bit nervous about that? I mean, I'm a train wreck before we press record.
Well, Kristan, do you maybe want to take that first?
well, just to make a point, In my first job, I worked as a switchboard operator. So people never saw my face. They could never put a face to the person that they were addressing. So I could, in all honesty, say whatever I wanted to say and be as
And I trust you did.
as to be as person as I wanted to be. Now I can't really do that because people can actually hold you accountable when they see they put a face to the
Yeah,
name, you know,
yeah, yeah.
which
Yeah.
was scary, but I've become more comfortable with doing it, especially with in-person podcasts that I've had the privilege to do at our office in Stellenbosch. But it's definitely a new experience. I'm not too sure how to judge it yet, but I know it's going to be a learning curve as well. And I just have to say, in our first visual podcast, which was with Mr. Unati Kamlana, you did so well. I'm genuinely so proud of you.
Yeah, yeah.
Thanks, man.
No, I
I
mean,
know that.
I was really glad to listen to that podcast. I mean, it was unfortunate that I couldn't attend, but yeah, I was very, very pleased with it. And I also told Mr. Kamlana, by the way, when I gave him the feedback on the podcast, that I was really, really happy with not only how the podcast was conducted by you guys, but also by just the insights that he was able to share. And maybe just to speak to Simo's question on my end as well. I actually haven't really thought about it that much, to be honest. I've appeared on a few visual podcasts before, virtual podcasts, I suppose is the right word, before, and I haven't really thought too much about it. I mean, I appeared on Big Daddy Liberty's show quite a number of times, and I didn't think too much about it. I mean, it's only when I heard Simo ask the question that I really started thinking about it. It probably is daunting, I suppose. But I think what helps is that when we're having the conversation like this, it seems like we're having the conversation among the three of us. And both of you guys are
Yeah.
obviously people that I know.
Yeah.
So, there isn't any nerves, certainly not at the moment, that I
take
have.
it we're calming influences.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's a bit easier to think about it in that way, as opposed to thinking about it as talking to the thousands of people that will,
Which you in fact
eventually.
are.
Well, I am,
You
I
are
suppose.
doing that.
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, I think it helps to think about it just as having the conversation among the three of us, even though we know that this is obviously going to be broadcasted and a lot more people are going to hear the podcast and listen to it. But maybe a question from my side for the two of you guys. What is it that you guys are most passionate about? And let's perhaps try and ground this, on the values of Nova Mentis.
So if I can start off just there, Nova Mentis values autonomy is the word autonomy.
Yeah.
Autonomy.
Autonomy.
Of the individual. Yeah.
Yes, autonomy of the individual. I genuinely value that because something that I've learned in terms of or in relations with other people is that people are very quick to expect other people to adopt their views. And I just wish that people could be more tolerant to what another person has to say without necessarily adopting what that person has to say. You can still be open-minded, you can still have your own views and not agree with that person, but still have a civil conversation on that specific topic. And I genuinely hope to achieve that here with Nova Mentis. It's something I've always been passionate about. I want to be able to speak to you, to understand where you are coming from when you were saying what you were saying, but not necessarily alter my own views. And I don't necessarily achieve to alter your views. People should just sit down and have conversations, especially on things that they disagree about. But at the end of the day, you can disagree about things like pizza toppings. You can't necessarily disagree about something like human rights, which is what I actually aim to do with my specific topics that I wish to cover here in Nova Mentis. In the Studentenplan wing or the Studentenplan aspect, I usually only address Afrikaans and language related queries and topics that people might want to cover. But with Nachel, I wish to cover a range of other topics, especially things relating to human rights and people being able to exercise autonomy of the individual.
Yeah, no, I think that's wonderful. I really do. Simo, do you wish to enlighten us about some of the things that inspire you?
I'm sort of going to piggyback off Kristan's point. I forgot how we have it worded on our aim, but for me, what stands out is free speech. There's an opportunity here for us to just participate in very fruitful discourse, and I'm very much in love with that. And yes, in love. I love the fact that we're going to get to speak to people we may not agree with. We get to speak with people we do agree with. As long as we have this sort of safe space where we can just have a conversation, learn. I mean, that's how you learn. That's how we grow. You approach a topic you may know or know nothing about, and then people express how they feel about it, what they know about it, and then you take it on. And that excites me. That really excites me. So I hope that's a good enough answer for you, Phila.
Yeah, no, that's good enough. I mean, and I think maybe just another question for you before I perhaps share some of the things that I'm passionate about. Of all the podcasts that I've recorded, which one would you say sticks out to you? And which one do you think has in it a lesson that you find to be most appealing to you?
So the podcast that you did with Nick Hudson actually was so exciting to listen to, and it was such a fruitful conversation. I genuinely enjoyed editing that podcast and just listening to it while I was editing it. It's amazing just to interact with people that know more than you, because I've always adopted this view that you cannot be intimidated by people that know more. You can only be taught. And that's
Yeah,
exactly
yeah,
what I experienced when I listened to your podcast with Nick Hudson. It just stood out. It
yeah.
literally
Is there
stood out.
anything in particular that stood out to you? I actually love that podcast too, by the way. There are
I
so many
genuinely
things that I
did.
took away from it. But is there anything in particular that you found appealing to you?
Not necessarily, because every single segment that I did, it was just it just added on. It was just like this domino, not even domino effect, the snowball effect. Because
Yeah,
once you
yeah.
think that that's its peak, the next segment comes, and I'm like, ah,
Yeah, yeah. No, now I'm glad that you thought that.
it
And I
was so
will
good.
let Nick Hudson know.
Okay.
Simo, on your side?
So I take it between me and Kristan, great minds think alike. But
Ah,
instead of the second one, for me, it's the first one with Nick Hudson, the one you did last year, like during which discussed much of COVID related issues. And so what I liked about it was its controversial nature, actually. I liked how
right.
he took on vaccines, he took on
Yeah,
COVID as a whole and how it's being handled. There was quite a bit I actually, oh no, not quite a bit. Yeah, quite a bit. Yes, there was quite a bit I actually did not agree with there, but I was happy to take it on because it's not like he was making incorrect points.
yeah,
There was a lot of value in what he said, and I really enjoyed listening to that one. I really
yeah.
loved it.
And again, perhaps besides the controversy and the contrarian nature of the podcast, is there anything in particular that maybe Nick or myself said during that podcast that you thought stuck out to you?
Well, it's actually the spirit of the podcast. It's contrarian nature, man. I
Yeah,
love controversy. You know me and
yeah,
drama, so
yeah. You're gonna get us into trouble, Simo.
that's the whole point.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So the
No,
entire spirit of the conversation, man, I enjoyed it. It was a very good opportunity for me to learn, and I did. I really did. I was actually on Google right after and during the podcast.
yeah, yeah. No, I'm glad, man. I mean, I've told Nick Hudson this before. I said it in the previous podcast, by the way. We can perhaps link it in the description of this video as well. That he's genuinely one of the few people that I have a lot of respect for. And for me, it isn't so much what he says. I mean, we may disagree with what he says, but for me, it's just the manner in which he presents his arguments. It's very,
It's the
very well
spirit of
laid
his
out.
thinking.
Yeah, I mean, it's very well laid out, and he has this way, or this remarkable ability, rather, of disagreeing with one without acrimony and without any antagonism, and making you feel like you don't
Mm.
know anything.
No,
And I know that
absolutely.
over the 3 podcasts that I've recorded with Nick Hudson, there's been a plethora of things about which I knew nothing, but Nick didn't in any way make me feel that way. But maybe just to talk perhaps to the single podcast that I found extremely insightful, it must be the one that I recorded with Professor Stan Duplessis
Ah,
on individualism and collectivism. There are
yeah.
so many things in that podcast that for me just really brought everything that I had learned together. Just the spirit that Prof. Duplessis embodies, and just the manner in which he carries himself, and just his emphasis on reading. He got me to read quite a few books for that podcast. One of which, and perhaps the one book that really stuck with me, was Dostoevsky's Notes from Underground.
Mm.
In which he argued, I will be very daring to sum up what Dostoevsky argued in that great novel.
Do
Um,
it.
he argued that essentially, even if it were true that human beings could be controlled, Thomas Sowell puts it very well. He says human beings are not chess pieces on a chessboard that can be
Mm.
moved around at one's will to fit some grand design. So what Dostoevsky says is, even if human beings were like that, even if it were possible for us to dictate and tell people how they should behave to achieve some sort of utopianist or utopian, outlook on life, that it would still not be an attractive mode of living. And that, I think, is the crucial takeaway from the book. He puts it beautifully in, I think, the middle passage in the book, where he says, man isn't a piano key. And that even if it were proved to him by natural science and mathematics, even if it really were proved to him that he were a piano key, man would still go out of his way to prove to you that he isn't, as though that was so necessary. And I thought that was really one of the crucial takeaways. I'm also extremely passionate, as you guys have deduced by now, about financial education and financial literacy, or the dire lack thereof in South Africa, because I do think that because there's been a lack of education on financial literacy, that the responsibility of educating young people about their finances is now solely delegated to their parents and other members of society who themselves had no knowledge on financial literacy and financial education. So this financial illiteracy remains a perpetual cycle that is not about to end unless something drastic is done about it, unless people like ourselves start talking about these things, so that younger people just start learning and thinking a great deal about these things, because really we need to break that cycle. If we aren't able to introduce the content in the school level, we should at the very least be able to talk about it in our media platforms. And that's one of the things that I'm extremely passionate about.